Well, thank you, Martin, and good afternoon to you all. Martin has been touching already on some of the obstacles, and before we go into possible solutions, I've been tasked to report on the responses to the consultation. And in the first slide that you will see, we try to show what the information is actually based on. And I think there are two distinguishing factors we have to take into consideration here. The first is that researchers are the largest group that actually contributed to the public consultation. More than 50% of the respondents, of the 590 respondents, were researchers. 81%, 4/5, which is in the top of the league of the responses, actually was an identification of researchers' careers and mobility as being problematic and an area of great attention to be given to by the European Union. 81% versus the second one in the league, 68% on research infrastructure, then knowledge transfer, 66%, just to give you an idea that the researchers' careers and the mobility really came out on top of the consultation area for action, and this is a shared concern throughout the entire research community. Needless to say that the responses were rich, were detailed, and you have been told that we will publish a full analysis and a summary of this you have already in your package. What I want to do next is I want to identify three key areas to highlight here in this first round of this session. Three main stumbling blocks on what actually turns out to be a true obstacle course. I want to come to the next slide on that. And what you see here is recruitment, funding, gender equality, all identified as major stumbling blocks. Position papers, responses also showed that there is no quick fix one actor solution. We need to have joint action on different fronts. We have to concentrate ERA efforts on the obstacles which eliminate on the obstacles to be eliminated and obstacles where a knock-on effect can be created by their removal. In the next slide, I want to go into the details of the reporting back on the recruitment practices. Respondents have stated very clearly that the current recruitment practices hold back mobility. So what's the overall perception? So about 60 to 80%, if we include those who mark moderately important in their response, actually identify recruitment processes as an impediment to mobility. So a very high number. And what are the explanations given to this? Well, 85% state that they perceive this as the result of protectionism, of nepotism. 77% attribute this to the absence of a genuine human resources strategy at the institutional level. And another 67% of the respondents believe that this is due to an absence of easily accessible information. For instance, finding access to job advertisements, for instance, as being published through your access. There are also other explanations. 60 to 65% of the respondents stated that they believe that this is due to the explicit policy choice of the hiring institution, or they believe it is due to national or university rules, or they simply think it's because there is a lack of an obligation to be open and transparent and merit-based. Young researchers in particular, and as regrouped in Eurodoc, have strongly flagged up transparency in recruitment processes as an area of priority. In the next slide, I want to show you the results of what respondents feel about funding and portability of grants. 66% identify the lack of portability of publicly funded grants as a real barrier to mobile research. To be honest, also 60% of the respondents believe that there simply is an insufficient number of grants, an insufficient number of fellowships aimed at mobile researchers. So the lack of funding clearly also is shown here. What's the explanation that respondents give to the lack of portability of publicly funded grants? Well, 68% believe that funders want to keep full control over their funds. 67% believe that the institutions face legal and administrative barriers. Another 66% believe that there is a lack of clear and transparent transfer conditions. And 61% believe that this is due to institutions who want to keep their staff, which may be a very great thing in its own right. Science Europe on this issue in its position paper really acknowledges that this is a major issue and encourages, as we also heard earlier this morning, the spread of the money follows researchers rationale to organize the portability of grants. In the next slide, I want to come to a topic from which the data have actually been retrieved from another part of the survey than the one I was reporting on until now. It's on the part related to gender. There was 58% of the people filling in the questionnaire that responded to this. But I think it's important that we pick up this element here within this session on researchers, because many of the issues flagged up having to do with working conditions, contractual arrangements, is something which is very crucial to the attractiveness of the research career. It has to be said, though, that in the gender section of the consultation, also explicit attention was being given to the importance of integrating the gender dimension in the research content. So what's the overall perception? Now, Anneli Pauli made already some comments on that this morning. In her opening statement, 78% find that research performance could be higher if there was a more pronounced gender balance in research teams. And 65% of the respondents find that Europe does itself short in terms of socio-economic growth as a result of the lack of gender equality. So what's the explanations? Well, respondents find that gender stereotypes on the labour market represent, or 57% of the respondents find that it has to do to the gender stereotypes on the labour market. Another 54% attribute it to a lack of top-level support in research institutions. And 54% also state that they believe there's a slow progress in the modernization of research institutions. LERU, the League of Research-Intensive Universities, really flagged this one up in their position paper and stating that strong leadership at the top of the institution to push gender policies is absolutely crucial to make a change on the work floor. I'll end the slides here, but I simply want to underline that these are three elements that I took out of the results of the survey, but these are three stumbling blocks on what's a true obstacle race to be run, and on some of those I would like to come back in the second round.
So thank you for that, Stefan. Thank you very much. What we'll do now is we'll have some very quick questions on Stefan's presentation before we complete the cycle of presentations. So, any questions on this first presentation? I was wondering, reflecting a little bit on the term moderator. What does moderator mean? Does it mean that you're like a carbon control rod in a nuclear power station? In this case, could we have some more energy on the questions, please? Yes.
If nobody's asking a question, I'd be happy to contribute. Roya Gathele from the University of Oxford, and I also run a consulting company called Oxford Limited, specialized in the economics of innovation. I'm glad to see statistically what was my impression anyway of how I would think about this whole question about the labor market. I just wonder, now that we have this data, like showing very obviously issues relating to, well, nepotism, gender asymmetries, what's going to happen with that now that we have that obvious facts? And I also feel a little bit that this data kind of like, I mean, in the morning it was all about excellence, and there was not really a definition of the word excellence, but this data is in strong contradiction to any type of definition of what excellence means. It's sort of like a very honest statement of where we stand. So what's going to happen next with this type of information at hand?
Any panelists would care to respond to that? I personally have a lot of sympathy with or empathy with the question, in that I think we've beaten the analysis to death. I think we need a little bit of action. I understand that we'll perhaps best pick the question up at the end. If you wouldn't mind reminding me of that before we conclude. Any other further questions? No. So it's my pleasure to call on Professor Vanessa Diath from University College London to address us.